Ms. Robinson, first of all, we'd like to thank you so much for talking with the Alabama Department of Public Health about the pandemic influenza that occurred in 1918. I understand that you were actually living here in Chilton County. Could you tell us a little bit about your age, how it affected your family?
Just everybody about it had the flu at the same time. In my family, I didn't have it, and my daddy was sick, but he wasn't dead sick. He was able to help out. And my grandmother and granddaddy lived just about a half a mile from us. They were all down, but except one of the boys. So it left up me and Papa to do the cooking, and they got the wood in. Of course, we had wood stoves back then, and they got the wood and all fired up the stove. And me and Papa did the cooking. All they wanted was soup. We didn't try to cook a meal, we just some kind of soup. The biggest fuss, I remember fixing rutabagas, and Papa would peel the rutabagas for me. And then we had a great big old iron pot that sat down in the eye of the stove, and I'd fill that thing full of rutabagas and water, a big hunk of meat, make soup for both families. He'd come bring the soup, come and get the soup with cornbread. I'd fix cornbread. We didn't have crackers then, I don't reckon, but I'd have that cornbread, and we all had that. But nobody ate him much. Nobody was too sick to eat. Just more, I forcing it on them to get them to eat anything. And it was just awful. Everybody was sick. It was just terrible times with everybody. It wasn't just one family, it was everybody.
Did y'all have any physicians that actually could come out and see about the sick in their homes? Was that available to you?
We didn't have all that back then. The nearest hospital was Birmingham, and all back then that was just too far for anything. Just couldn't imagine, unless it was just something had to be done to go that far to a hospital. We didn't have doctors then like we got now. We didn't even see a doctor till my mother was pregnant at the same time. Gertrude was born during that, my sister was, and she had the flu. And we just knew we was going to lose her. She'd get to coughing. We just had to work to get her to breathe. But she did make it.
Do you recall how long this illness lasted, and do you remember if it came back, if it lasted a few weeks, and then did it reoccur?
It was about almost 2 weeks that they wasn't, from the time they got sick till they got to where they could get up and get around.
Do you recall some of the symptoms that your family members had?
You just ached all over the arms and everything. And say, I know my next to the baby, he'd say, rub my arm. His arms is hurt.
Do you remember what medicines were used at that time? Was aspirin available, or were there other medicines that were given to the sick?
Them that went to see the doctor, he'd just say, go home and take aspirin and drink plenty of water, any kind of liquid.
Do you recall if businesses, schools, and churches were affected by this?
We didn't have a church up here at that time, but the school was closed. There wasn't no school. They had to close. There was nobody. The teachers was even sick. Well, everybody stayed at home during this. Nobody didn't have no getting out. Nobody was hardly able to get out, but them that was had their hands full at home.
Were neighbors able to help each other out during this time? I understand you said a lot of the entire community was quite ill.
There was one man in the community, and I can't think of his name. He'd come by and check, but he wouldn't come in. He'd just come to the door. Is everything all right? And go on checking others. There was several deaths, but I don't remember but one of them, and that was a baby. And I know the Daddy and his brother had to go bury his baby. There wasn't enough people they didn't even have a funeral. They just went to the cemetery and buried the baby. And I reckon, I thought that was the awfulest thing. at that age that they couldn't even have a funeral, and it had just go buried. And that's the reason I remember the babies so well. The young ones just as sick as the older ones. Everybody was sick, and I mean as sick.
If this were to occur again, what would be your suggestions to people, and how do you think people would do in this day and time if something like this should ever happen again?
Everybody got to go to Walmart and all these other places to be with something like that. And now people don't stay at home when they're sick unless they get to where they can't go. They go spread whatever they got.